the quietest place in the world is a place in Minnesota called Orfield Labs. And in that laboratory, there's a place called an anechoic chamber, which means it's a room that is built to not reflect any sound waves. All the sound waves are absorbed by the walls. And this room was built for testing sensitive medical equipment and scientific instruments and that kind of thing. And the people who were working in this laboratory reported that as they were spending time in there, they found this experience to be deeply unsettling, because normally we would consider quietness to be about a 30 decibel level, but this room is about a 7 decibel level, which means that almost no sound waves are being reflected back to a person's ears. And so they kind of took advantage of this unique environment to do some psychological experiments on what it is like for people to be in a place of total silence. And as they did these experiments, most people found that they desperately wanted to be let out after only about a few minutes. The sound of nothing but your own organs functioning is something that a lot of people find disturbing. And one person reported that to him, the sound of his facial muscles moving was like nails on a chalkboard, and he couldn't stand it. Others reported being upset by the dozens of tiny little pops and squeaks made by their joints as they were just breathing and moving around. Most subjects were begging to get out after only half an hour and experiencing discomfort, disorientation, nausea. Some started hallucinating, and almost no one has made it to the 45-minute mark. It is a deeply unsettling experience to hear nothing but your own body living. I sometimes wonder if something similar happens when people have gained everything they've ever wanted in life. Like, human beings are so used to scarcity, they're so used to wanting things and striving for the necessities of life, that as you approach that threshold of having everything, you're left with this unsettling silence, this void. And as you experience this silence, all the questions that maybe have been drowned out in your life by just always thinking about the next thing you need, these questions begin to get louder and louder in your mind. Who am I really? What is my purpose? Why does anything exist at all? These questions that a lot of people just kind of shrug off as they go about their life. Suddenly, you can't avoid them. Suddenly, you have to think about them. You have to do something with this question. And these questions become so overwhelming that they can suck the joy out of life. It brings to mind a quote that we use in the Alpha course from Jim Carrey. He says, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer." Now, I know a lot of people will hear that and they'll scoff at that and they'll think, well, I would like the opportunity to try, right? I would be the exception if I did have everything I wanted. I know I would be happy. But as a culture, you know what? I think we do suspect that Jim Carrey's right. One of the greatest movies ever made, and it's recognized as one of the greatest movies ever made, is Citizen Kane. It's the story of a man who had everything but lost his own soul. I think we find that story compelling because there's something inside us that says, yeah, you know, I'm worried that if I do get everything I want, it won't be enough. I think it also explains our culture's fetish for all things Buddhism. Like here in a place in Whistler where the world's top 1% of the population come to live and play and consume and enjoy all the luxuries of life, it's true that Buddha statues are shockingly popular. I remember a friend of mine was working as a chambermaid, and she said 80% of people's homes have a Buddha in them. What is so compelling about this symbol of a prince who had everything and left it all to go in search of life's deeper questions? See, the promise of consumerism, the promise presented to us by advertising, is that with more stuff comes more happiness, right? But as we raise kids in a time and place in history where they have been isolated from scarcity and from want like no other generation in history, let me tell you, that happiness, that sense of well-being, it hasn't come. Fulfillment hasn't come. Depression is just as rampant now as it ever was. Suicide rates are as high as they've ever been. Family breakdown is unprecedented. That satisfaction with life hasn't come. And kids and adults are rejecting the real world in place of false realities that they find with their devices, with computer games, social media, whatever, or with drugs, because the real world is really frustrating and it is really problematic. An article in the National Post a few weeks ago talked about how researchers in Toronto are experimenting with LSD as a way of helping people that have everything to cope with existence. LSD is the crisis, is the answer to the crisis of existence, because you don't have to deal with reality anymore. See, the problem is that once you're not struggling to live anymore, then you have to answer the question, why am I living? Who am I really? Why is there anything at all? What is it all for? Now, how does the Bible speak to this situation? The Bible speaks to this situation in a lot of ways, but one of them is this book that we are studying right now called Ecclesiastes, and it catches a lot of people off guard because it doesn't talk to this issue from an outside perspective. It jumps right into the middle of it. It speaks to us from a life that has been lived through this crisis. We get someone sharing their testimony of what it is like to live when you have nothing left to strive for. And so in the passage we're going to look at today, which is Ecclesiastes 1:12-18, which Doug read for us, we're going to join this man who calls himself the teacher or the preacher on his quest for meaning. And this quest is going to look at just two things, so it's very limited in scope. The first thing he's going to look at is everything, and then the second thing is the nature of wisdom itself. So that's where we're going to go this morning. Last week we looked at the first part of the first chapter where the teacher told us about how there's nothing new under the sun. This week I'm going to try and be the exception to that by preaching on Ecclesiastes on Mother's Day. So with that said, let's jump into the text. It says in verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. So here we have a king on a quest to understand the big questions of life. It's significant that he's the king because part of his job is to make decisions that affect the lives of hundreds of thousands or more people every single day. And so he needs to wrestle with these big questions about what a human life is actually worth. But being a king also means that he doesn't have to live or work in order to live. He actually has the time and the resources to do this kind of thing. He has the time and the resources to investigate all the different philosophies and beliefs that were around at that time. And so he says he applies his heart to seek and search out all that is done under heaven. He wants to understand not just how things work, but why. Why things work, why things matter, why people matter. And one of the things that we need to know about this search that he's on is that he's only looking using secular parameters. God is not a part of the picture here. How do we know that? Because he's using a really key phrase. He uses this phrase, under heaven. Under heaven. And then in verse 14, he uses the phrase, under the sun. And what he means by that is he's embarking on this quest for meaning, but he's drawing this line and saying, I'm only going to look at what I can see in the world in front of me. I'm not looking at what God has revealed. So what God has revealed through Scripture, what he had revealed through the law and the prophets, that is not a part of the discussion. He just wants to see what the world is on its own terms. Who am I? Why are we here? What's it all for? And this is an important quest. This has actually been the driving force for a lot of our culture's great scientific accomplishments. Why do we send probes out into the solar system? Why do we spend billions and billions of dollars on space telescopes that go up into orbit instead of just spending that money on health care or on education? Well, it's because we as a human species, we have this drive to know and to understand ourselves. In many cultures, this pursuit of knowledge and of understanding is seen as one of the highest callings a human being can live. The great philosopher Socrates taught that an unexamined life is not worth living. He said, if you're going about your life and you're just surviving and you never stop to ask that question, why? You're just an animal. You're not fully human. You need to understand why. And so our teacher, he invests his life into this quest to see and to understand. What I find absolutely remarkable about this is that he doesn't really give any attention to, explaining his methodology or his initial findings or his sources. He just goes straight to the conclusion because that's the only thing that matters. He says, it is an unhappy business that God has given the children of man to be busy with. Now, there are two ways that we can understand this statement. The first is that everything done under heaven, everything we spend our lives doing is that unhappy business. Life in general is suffering. He's completely with Buddha on that one. The other way to take it is that the very task of searching for meaning, that God gave us minds that are capable of even asking this question, that this is an unhappy business, and that this search to understand is not going to make us happy. We're not going to be happy with what we find. The more we learn, the more questions we're going to have, the more frustrated we're going to become with our existence. And so he says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked can't be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Everything is vanity. It's like a vapor. You can chase it, but you'll never catch it, and even if you could, it would evaporate into nothingness. You'd be left holding nothing. But even more than that, he's telling us that his search for understanding, it hasn't yielded results because some things just can't be resolved with human ingenuity and wisdom. There are some problems for which we are completely incapable of fixing with our knowledge, with science, with technology, with philosophy, with all these things. We come no closer to making the world a better place. We look back on the past, right? We think that we've progressed so far because we've got more technology, we've got better medicine, we've got bigger government, we've got more education and all that. But what we find is the human condition is still there. We still hurt. Life is still hard, isn't it? And there are some things that we are no closer to solving or resolving in our lives than they were in Solomon's day, 3,000 years ago. There's still something broken in this world and broken in the human soul that we have not been able to fix. Take crime, for example. Why does crime happen? Well, some people will say crime happens because people are left with no other choice, right? And that is true sometimes. It is true that sometimes people have no way of sustaining themselves or surviving within the legal parameters, and so they steal in order to eat. It happens. And so the thinking goes, okay, if we eliminate all those social conditions that drive people to crime, there will be no crime, right? But that's never happened. It hasn't. You know, every time I read the news, I'm reading something about the Bacon brothers and their associates, who are a bunch of thugs my age from the town I grew up in, who ran a drug empire. One of them was shot and killed a few years ago, and the other two have been in and out of jail for murder and other things since then. You ask the question, okay, why did these boys become gangsters, right? What drove them to the point where they could take the life of another human being without a shred of remorse? Was it life in the hood that, gave them no hope? No. They had a perfectly normal middle-class upbringing. Did they have trouble at home? Nothing out of the ordinary, as far as we know. Their parents are actually still married to each other. Well, was it a lack of education, right? Is it just that they did not have access to, all the things that we have developed in public education in order to raise, well-adjusted, confident human beings? No, they all did really well in high school. They all played on the sports teams, were well-liked by their peers, and their parents were high school guidance counselors. See, there's something twisted in the world. There's something twisted in our own souls that all of our human strength, all of our wisdom has not been able to untwist. Right now, some of you might be thinking, like, does this guy really have no clue that this is Mother's Day? Why are we wasting our time with an existential crisis? Well, let me tell you this. As a pastor, Mother's Day is a day that reveals the brokenness of the world. I love my mom. I'm thankful for my mom. I'm thankful for that my kids have a mom. But every single year, without fail, and this year is no exception, every single year, at least one person, usually more, will come up to me and they will say, just so you know, I'm not going to be at church on Mother's Day. I don't do church on Mother's Day. I hate Mother's Day. Why? Because they didn't get to have a loving mom. They had a monster. Or motherhood, their own motherhood, has become immensely painful because of what their kids have had to go through, or the relationship they have with their kids right now. Or death has struck and they've lost their mom. Or they've lost a child. Or they desperately want to be a mom, but biology or other life circumstances has held that shut. And so Mother's Day hurts. It's awful. For a lot of people, they just do not want to be around other human beings as they are all talking about how thankful they are for their moms. So they don't want to be in church. Let me tell you, here's a good reason to be here today. The Bible acknowledges the problem. God sees all of that pain, and this is not a no-go topic of conversation for him. It's right here in the Bible. There is something crooked in the world that we cannot make straight. There is something broken. Things are not as they should be. And the second part of this little couplet says, what is lacking can't be counted. Now, when the teacher says that what is lacking can't be counted, he's saying that we know we're missing something, but we don't even know what we're missing. We don't even know what questions to ask. We don't even know where to look. In the book and the movie, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is fiction, this great civilization builds a supercomputer called Deep Thoughts to answer the biggest question, the answer of life, meaning, the universe, and everything. So they set this computer, they set Deep Thoughts to work processing, and it takes 7.5 million years, and after it's processed all the data, and after it's checked and rechecked everything, it spits out the answer. And the answer is? What is it? 42. The answer to life, meaning in the universe, is 42. 42, someone yells at the computer, is that all you've got to show for 7.5 million years' work? I checked it very thoroughly, Deep Thought replies. And that is quite definitely the answer. I think the problem, to be quite honest with you, is that you've never actually known what the question is. We don't know even what question to ask. You know, in the last 100 years, humanity has answered made some of the most incredible scientific discoveries and uncovered some of the most incredible truths about the universe that we could even imagine. Think about E equals mc squared, right? We know the speed limit of the universe. We know that every quantity of mass contains equal amounts of energy and vice versa. But as amazing as that is, answering that question doesn't fill that void in our soul. We know the expansion rate of the universe, and that has allowed scientists to, make a model of how the universe has grown, and they can run it backwards, and they can use all their formulas and calculations to tell us what they think is the exact temperature of all the matter that existed in the universe 1/1,000,000th of a second after the universe came into existence. They know that value, but knowing that does not give us value. It doesn't make a human life worth living. We don't even know what question to ask. Francis Schaeffer wrote, all men have a deep longing for significance, a longing for meaning, and no man, regardless of his theoretical system, is content to look at himself as a finally meaningless machine which can and will be discarded totally and forever. We're answering lots of great questions, we're just not asking the right ones. Questions that will satisfy us. I mentioned before Socrates who said, an unexamined life is not worth living. Let me tell you something else about Socrates. At one point in his life, he went to visit an oracle who's kind of like a prophetess. And she told him that he was the smartest man in the world. And that deeply troubled him. And so he went about investigating what that could possibly mean or how that could possibly be true. And in the end, he said, it is true that I am the smartest man in the world, and here is why. Everyone else thinks that they know something. I know nothing, but at least I know that. Socrates said, life unexamined is not worth living. He did not live to a ripe old age. He basically allowed or invited the people of Athens to sentence him to death. He went on that quest too, and he came up with a big fat 0. See, the first part of our teacher's quest was to find that theory of everything, find meaning in the universe. And all he got was what he calls hevel, meaninglessness, vapor, emptiness. But this isn't all he did. The second part of his quest was a moral experiment, a quest for understanding right and wrong. He says in verse 16 and 17, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had a great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. So the terms here are not to know everything and versus knowing insanity. The word here doesn't mean insanity. This madness and folly is a way of living with complete abandon for what is right and what is wrong. Living without caring about anything. And he's not the first person in humanity to try this. The Roman historian Plutarch, he writes about an interesting philosopher in Athens named Diogenes. If you go to the next slide. This dude who apparently lived in a clay pot for some reason. And he didn't care at all what people thought of him. He ate whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, slept wherever he wanted, as you can see, whenever he wanted, defecated where he wanted. How do I put this politely for church? He interfered with himself whenever and wherever he wanted, and whenever he had the urge to do so. And what was remarkable about this man named Diogenes is how people responded to him. Because everybody hated him and found him really grating to be around, but they also secretly wanted to be him. They wanted to live like he did, not caring what anyone thinks. They looked at him and they saw freedom to do whatever a person wants. No self-regulation, no self-censorship, just being totally honest and being exactly who you are. Is that something that people find compelling? Yeah, I mean, you could put some of his quotes up there and write Tiny Buddha, and, people would post it all over Instagram. Plutarch, this historian, he writes that at one point Alexander the Great met Diogenes in Athens. And he said this to him, if I was not Alexander, I should wish to be Diogenes. To which Diogenes replied, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes. It's like the greatest burn in history. But there is something very compelling about this madness. Our teacher sets out to discover whether a life lived in wisdom, of moral uprightness, will be better than living like Diogenes, or whether it's all just a wash. And this is his conclusion. I perceive that this also is striving after wind. For with much wisdom comes much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So you can strive to make yourself wise and more learned, but does that make your life better? Does that actually make you happier in the end, on the deepest level? He'd say no. Does more education, does more life experience make a person happier? Or is it true that sometimes old men are really grumpy? Does increased awareness of the world give us more reasons to say, wow? Or does it give us more pain in seeing how broken things are? More hollowness that we can't fix. This is what our teacher wants us to grasp. And where does it leave us? Where does it leave us other than more depressed than when we came in here? See, the conclusion that our teacher has been pushing us to is that if we have nothing more than life under the sun, if we are to live our lives only on secular terms, taking our cues from culture and from marketing and everything else about how and why we are supposed to live our lives, then we are left with that big fat zero. We are left with nothing but emptiness. There will not be peace. There will not be happiness. And the harder you strive for meaning and significance under the sun, the more painful the search will become. And this is something really important I want us to understand. This is by design. This is 100% on purpose. And it says right here, this unhappy business is given to us by God. The teacher says it, and Paul says it in Romans 8. Listen to what he says. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. The fact that we find no meaning and no satisfaction in life under the sun is for us a gift. It's a gift. And maybe you're thinking, how on earth could all the brokenness and twistedness be a gift? That's a very, very good question to answer. And here's the thing. It is a gift in the same way that pain is a gift. Pain is a response of your nervous system to damage to your body's tissues. The reason why your finger hurts when you smash it with a hammer is because your body is warning you, if you don't stop doing that, if you don't knock it off, you're not going to have a finger. Right? If you lost the ability to feel pain right now, you would be in tremendous danger and you wouldn't even know it. And this futility, this emptiness that we feel, that we carry when we are pursuing life under the sun, this pain is a gift from God to help us understand that apart from him, our existence can never give us joy and peace and satisfaction. Apart from our Creator, we have no hope. Apart from the giver of life, we are headed for death, and we need to know that. We can't just be in bliss. He loves us too much to leave us in blissful ignorance of this. I always wondered about the story of Babel when I was a kid, right? Like, it's in most children's Bibles, and it's like all these people are getting together, and they're working together and cooperating wonderfully to build this monument to themselves that will allow them to reach the heavens. And it's like, great, they've got peace, they're building cool stuff, and everyone's, getting along. Why would God go mess all that up? Because it is quite plainly divine sabotage. Why? Because then if they do this, they think they'll be fine without God. And as beings who are created to know God, to experience God, to enjoy God, to glorify God, our existence can never be meaningful. We can never perpetuate our own lives apart from him. See, they wanted the kingdom of God, but they didn't want God as king. God loves us. He loves people enough to assert himself and show us that we desperately need him. Knowing God is the greatest good you or I can ever experience. And so we need to be reconciled to God. We need to feel the pain and the emptiness that comes from life apart from Him, because that is the only way we can ever be truly free and truly alive. Romans 8 continues. Paul said, the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it, in the hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. This is the good news. This is the good news here. Everything that is crooked will one day be made straight. Life under the sun is futile and hard and painful, but there is a God above the sun who is working to make all things new. He invites us to embrace our identity as His children so that we know who we are, so that we won't wrestle with that crisis of feeling like we are nothing more than an accident of chance and time and matter in a meaningless universe. He wants us to discover that we were made for a purpose. We were made to reign with Him for eternity. He wants us to join with all creation in doing what we were truly made to do, to worship Him by enjoying Him forever. Paul says in verse 18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not even worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed to us." Let's pray. Lord, these words are hard, and they push us in some sensitive areas. But we know that there is no true rest for our souls unless we find our rest in You. And so I pray, Lord, that we as Your people would not allow ourselves to be distracted or pulled away from You by anything else, but to find our soul's refuge and purpose and joy in being who You made us to be and delighting in who You are, for who You are. In Jesus' name, amen.